Liu Che and Gorgo have been fully released into Rise of Kingdoms, and with their release comes a whole entire new infantry meta, and with the new infantry meta, obviously new best commander pairings to make the strongest infantry murderball possible. So today, I'll be telling you the new strongest infantry murderball. I will start off talking about one march, and then I'll move on to 2 marches, 3 marches, 4 marches, 5 marches, and even 6 infantry marches. So if you're looking to get as much value as you can from your infantry, even if you're just looking to run 1 or 2 marches, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by discussing what commanders do you use if you're running just a singular march. And for a singular march of infantry, there's really only one option, and that's a Scipio Africanus with a Liu Che. It is the current best infantry combination, in my opinion, for just one march, because rather than running a Liu Che with a Sargon, which is arguably the current strongest infantry pairing, Scipio with Liu Che may not trade as good in a one-on-one situation, but Scipio has an AoE which Sargon does not have, and the reason I really like that is because if you have more AoE, it's going to be stronger on the open field. The more AoE you have, the more damage you're going to deal, and the better you're going to trade. And since Liu Che already has an AoE, being able to put 2 double AoE commanders together for a single march is really, really strong. There is just no doubt about it. We've seen time and time again, if you get double AoE together, the combo is really, really good. We've seen it with commanders like Nebu and YSG. We saw it with a Guan and a Leo. So whenever there's a double AoE, I love to put those 2 commanders together for one march, especially if they synergize really well. And in this situation, Scipio Africanus and Liu Che synergize quite well, so I do love that combination as your single and only infantry march if you choose to go down that route. If you don't want to get Liu Che, or you just feel like you don't really need him in your murderball, Guan with Scipio is fine, but I'm not going to really be focusing on that path in today's video. I'm more going to look at if you did choose to run the Scipio Liu Che, which I believe is the current strongest infantry march, in my opinion, for the open field. Now, if you're looking to make 2 infantry marches, which is still very reasonable for a free-to-play player, there are really 2 ways you could go here. The first thing you would have to do is, in both ways, split that Liu Che and your Scipio. You're going to have 2 different commanders at that point. They're not going to be together, and you're going to mix and match your commanders. The first way you could go is running a Guan Yu with a Scipio. That is a stock standard pairing. Everybody pretty much owns a Guan if they're a current infantry main, and Guan Yu with Scipio is obviously still going to perform quite well for the same reasons as before. It's a double AoE. Guan Yu's got fairly decent damage, Guan Yu's got a pretty good debuff, and Scipio is just doing Scipio things. So for the most part, Guan with Scipio is still going to be really, really good. And then you can put your Liu Che with a Sargon, which would probably be the current meta infantry murderball. If you're looking to make a meta infantry murderball, a Guan, Scipio, Sargon, Liu Che is probably the absolute too much meta and what most players would run as an absolute maximum for infantry. So if you're looking to make 2 marches, my personal preference would be a Guan Yu with a Scipio and then a Sargon with a Liu Che, and you're going to have a really strong and powerful murderball right there. You've got 3 AoEs between Liu Che, Guan, and Scipio. You've got 3 commanders, actually 4 commanders giving out really, really nice debuffs because every one of these commanders has a really powerful debuff. And then Scipio and Sargon especially are fairly stat-heavy commanders. When you look at their kit, they got health, they got defense, they got march speed. So both of these commanders do work quite well as primaries. And then Liu Che and Guan are really good secondaries. Obviously, Guan is a primary, but personally, if you're running 2 infantry marches, you got to choose from scratch, I would run a Guan with a Scipio and then a Sargon with a Liu Che to get the maximum amount of AoE and the maximum amount of damage you can just within those 2 marches. Now, if you're looking to move into running 3 marches, then you're going to pick up a few other Mightiest Governor related commanders, and at this point, you're definitely going to be wanting to run a Guan with a Scipio. There is no doubt about it. At this point, Guan has to come into the murderball no matter what, so Guan Scipio is definitely going to be one of your 3 marches. Like I said before, really solid double AoE and nice debuffs, and it's going to perform quite well at this point when you're starting to become a little bit more tight on which commanders you can choose from. Then for your second march, we're going to run a march that I've personally advocated for before. That's a Sargon with a Tariq, because Tariq is fairly decent if you're moving into 3 marches. If you want to get those 3 marches, Tariq is pretty much essential because the rest of the infantry commanders are much weaker compared to Tariq, and Tariq's got some pretty decent damage. He's got a nice amount of attack. He's got damage to calves that's basically increased by a fair amount, actually. He's got decent march speed out of territory, so all round, he's not a very strong open field commander in some situations, but he's a very high DPS commander. He is lacking AoE though, and obviously Sargon is lacking AoE as well, so it is a little bit difficult to run this combination in some situations, but you are starting to run out of proper AoE commanders for infantry, And I think that Tarek and the Sagan is pretty much an essential march to run. Then for your third march, we're going to grab that march that I recommended before, and that's just a Gorgo with a Liu Che, because at this point, Gorgo is pretty much one of the top tier commanders left. She's really, really good with Liu Che, and they synergize well together. So you're pretty much going to be leaving that combo for the rest of the game, because Gorgo with Liu Che is just very strong. There is so much synergy between both the commanders. It is absolutely insane, and that pretty much is the only way you can run Gorgo. And if you want to get the best, basically, amount of value you can from the 3 marches, Gorgo is essential, and she doesn't really work with any other infantry commanders besides Liu Che, so I definitely like the Gorgo with Liu Che more than putting Gorgo with like a Scipio or Gorgo with a Sagan, where she's not going to get as much value because she's smite damage and their skill damage gets more complicated. She is just simply really, really good with Liu Che, and I think there's no denying that. So if you're running 3 infantry marches, you're going to run a Guan with a Scipio, you're going to run a Tarek with a Sagan, and then a Gorgo with a Liu Che. Now, if you're looking to move into 4 infantry marches, and at this point, I don't recommend any free-to-play players to come here because you're going to notice a lot more lower value commanders come in, since if you've looked at the commanders we've used up at this point, pretty much every single good infantry commander has been used. There is no more really meta infantry commanders left. The rest are all pretty middle tier that aren't as strong. So if you're running 4 marches, you're going to stick with the same marches as before. Guan with Scipio, Sagan with Tarek, Gorgo with Liu Che, and then simply put for your 4th infantry march, Pakal and Harold. You're going to have to pick it up at some point, and I feel like with 4 marches is when it's going to get some more value, because when we look at Pakal and Harold, they're tanky commanders that like to get swarmed down, and if you're running 4 marches, you're going to get swarmed more often, so this is more of a safety march, and just an extra march you know is going to trade decently without you really needing to pay much attention to it, but it's never going to trade amazingly. That's the issue. That's why I didn't really put it in until this late in the murderball. So for the most part, a Pakal and a Harold is going to work really well. We know it's a very powerful combination, and as a bonus, you're going to be able to city pop really effectively with that Pakal and Harold. One thing to note is that at this point with 4 infantry marches, pretty much every single free-to-play and low-spender player should not get any more infantry marches. You should not go above 3 infantry marches, because as you've seen for your 4th infantry march, we've had to pull out an old, not very meta, and nowhere near as powerful infantry pair, purely because there is a lack of very meta commanders left at this point, because we've taken all the meta commanders and put them in our murderball already. We need to choose some of the older commanders, which is why anything more than 3 marches for any troop type I do not recommend, and especially for infantry where they lose value really quick, because at the moment, Pakal and Harold is nowhere near as strong as like a 4th cav march, then I definitely would not go for 4 infantry marches unless you're a mega whale who is just trying to be an infantry main. Now moving into 5 marches, this is where everything starts to get a lot more messy and a lot more mixed up, because we are definitely struggling for commanders at this point. There are not 10 really meta infantry commanders in the game right now. There are really only 6. So if you're moving into 10 marches, there's going to be a little bit of swapping around with your Sagan and your Tarek, and for 10 marches, what I would run is a Guan Yu with a Scipio still. I think this combination is not going to change, and you're going to run the Gorgo with the Liu Che. Those 2 combinations will not change because those 2 commanders synergize really well with each other, and some of them don't really synergize as well with other commanders. Like Guan doesn't really work with Liu Che or with Sagan, and then Gorgo doesn't work with anyone but Liu Che, so those 2 combinations are just going to stay together even until you get like 8 infantry marches, if that was even possible. Then for your basically 3rd march, you're going to still keep the Pakal and Harold as well, because they are also really, really well with how they synergize, and both of those commanders, while Harold does perform well with other commanders, Pakal really needs to be with Harold, and that's where Harold performs the best, so I don't mind having that Pakal and Harold combination basically stay static until your final infantry march, because they synergize really, really well. So those 3 pairings pretty much are going to stay together because they synergize really well. But then for your 4th pairing, you're going to drop the Tarek from your Sagan, and you're going to run a Sagan with an Alexander the Great. This is a combination I am personally an advocate for. I feel it's got a lot of instant damage, and then Alexander the Great's giving a fair amount of support. He's got a shield, he's got a pretty good debuff in his kit, so I am quite a fan of Alexander the Great. Obviously, he's a little bit more outdated compared to some of the other infantry commanders, but he's definitely still solid, and you could even try pick him up within 4 marches if you wanted. I do prefer him to basically be in the 5th march, though, because he is not as strong as other infantry commanders, though he is still powerful. There is no doubt about it. He's got lots of march speed, fair amounts of stats, and he works oddly well with Sagan. I couldn't say 100% why, but I've seen some pretty good Alexander the Great Sagan reports, and they've got a lot of march speed together, so you're going to be able to pretty much get out of any sticky situations you are in, and I don't mind that march, especially as just like a quick debuff and run march. It's going to work pretty damn well, and it's decent at this point when you're struggling to choose really strong commanders. So an Alexander the Great with Sargon for your 4th march, and then for your 5th march, you're going to run a Tariq with either a Honda or a Mehmed. And I know that might sound weird, why a Tariq? Well, when we look at the other commanders, we could try and split some of them up to go with Honda or split them up to go with Mehmed, but when we look at them, they're not really going to work when split up. I mean, the only other commander here would be like a Sargon with a Mehmed, which would be good, or a Sargon with a basically Honda, which would be good, but I feel that Sargon works better with Alex than Tariq does with Alex, so it kind of just makes sense to put basically Tariq with Honda or Mehmed, because those two commanders are generic leadership commanders which will perform better than most of the other infantry commanders on the open field. So at this point, you're going to have to start to dig into commanders like Honda and Mehmed to give your murderball as much effectiveness as possible. So now that we've gone up to 5 infantry marches, I'm going to tell you a 6th infantry march. But in my opinion, guys, nobody should have a 6th infantry march. There is nothing strong about this march. This march is pretty much absolutely garbage. So if you were to run 6 infantry marches, your first 5 would be Gorgo with Liu Che still, Alexander the Great with Sargon, Guan Yu with Scipio Africanus, Pakal and Harold, and then also don't forget your Tariq with a Honda or a Mehmed. So that's your 5 march murderball. But for your 6th march, you're not going to be shuffling around that 5 march murderball. There's no commanders that really need to be swapped there. You're going to be adding 2 new commanders, and it's really difficult to decide which commanders you could get. You could go for a support march if you wanted and all, but if you're looking for real infantry, then you're probably going to go with something like a CJ Flavius. I know that sounds insane. What am I smoking? Well, at this point, you're kind of just hunting for stats and damage. Everything else does not matter as much. And guess what has lots of stats and damage? Flavius has decent amounts of stats and decent amounts of damage. So when we look at Flavius, he's not an overall strong commander, but he's better than some of the options out there. Like, he's going to be stronger than a Richard, stronger than a Constantine, probably stronger than a Charles Martel, probably stronger than a Pyrrhus. So he's not going to be as good as CJ, but CJ is probably the best of the worst left over. So with your 6th infantry march, you're just going to run a Flavius with a CJ. You could also run a CJ with a Pyrrhus or a Charles Martel if you feel that's going to be better. But in my opinion, a Flavius just for pure damage factor at this point with a CJ is going to be the best of the worst combinations you could run for 6 infantry marches. So now, just as a recap, if you were to run all 6 infantry marches, and I'm not even going to go to 7, here is what you would use. For your 6 infantry marches, you would run a Gorgo with a Liu Che, an Alexander the Great with a Sargon, a Guan Yu with a Scipio, Pakal with a Harold, a Tariq with a Honda or a Mehmed, and then finally a CJ with a Flavius or a Pyrrhus or also a Martel. That is going to be your 6 march infantry murderball. So now that we've made it to the end of my video, I would like to just make one quick announcement, and that is join the Archer Syndicate Discord. It's completely free, you don't pay a single penny, and it's a great way to connect with me, fellow subscribers, fellow channel members, fellow experts in Rise of Kingdoms, etc. So my Discord is a really, really great place to join. You can ask questions about commanders, equipment, anything you would want. There is probably a section for it. And if you want to reach me, my Discord server is the best way, since if I ever get pinged there, I am pretty much guaranteed to reply. So if you ever want to discuss with me anything on that Discord server, now is really your best chance to join. And the link will be in the pinned comment and in the description. So I highly recommend joining. Now, I just want to say thank you for watching and I hope to see you in the next one.